Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Sword Art Online light novel review. This one is going to be for volume 24, which is Sword Art Online Unital Ring 3. So yeah, we're 3 volumes now into Unital Ring. So as usual with my reviews, we're pretty much sort of going to go through it sort of roughly scene by scene, part recap, but also giving my opinions along the way. As ever, in terms of non-spoiler thoughts, it's a good, enjoyable volume of SAO. This feels like the sort of transition volume where we're getting out of the introductory stuff and we're beginning to move more into sort of the middle of the arc stuff, and the mysteries are maybe becoming a little bit clearer and at least getting some sense for where we're going, though I will say the scope of what this arc is still feels very all over the place to me. I'm not really sure how big or small it necessarily is, but there's some very interesting things that happen right towards the end that seem to present the idea that things could get quite crazy in a few volumes' time. So that's the main thing to talk about here. So jumping in, we open up with sort of a scene that references the previous volume, which is that Argo has come with Kirito to meet with Kikuoka. So obviously we learned the kind of details about Argo because I suppose we properly got introduced to her in real life. So it actually turns out that the reason Argo and Kikuoka know each other is because Kikuoka has actually asked Argo to sort of work for him. She obviously is a reporter on the MMO Today, I think it is, website within the world. So she is actually someone who's really good to investigate these type of things. So she specifically has been tasked by Kikuoka to investigate the company Komura. Now, that's interesting by itself because, of course, in Unital Ring 1, and then I suppose the aftermath of this in Unital Ring 2, Asuna was introduced to a character named Shikimi Komura. And so far in the first 2 volumes, literally that's all it's been. It was kind of like a cliffhanger. They met. There's a little bit of a reaction to it where we find out that, oh yeah, she is from this family who's part of this company that's related to, the big companies involved in a lot of these kind of projects. So, that's why Argo's here to investigate Komura for effectively stuff like they are doing weird stuff with certain seed games. So that's interesting by itself. The reason he has Kirito here, because obviously Argo has just tagged along with a meeting that's actually between Kikuoka and Kirito, is that Kikuoka tells Kirito that someone has basically, dove into Underworld, sort of quote unquote hacked in. They weren't, officially meant to go into Underworld, but they have. They go through some of the, trying to figure this out, and they pretty much come to the conclusion that probably by the same method that everyone was able to dive into the Underworld at the end of the Alization arc again. Whoever did it this time is probably using that same connection. So the sort of Kayaba mystery, connection is beginning to sort of get brought up again here. So who is this mystery person who's going into the Underworld specifically? They also make the point that Underworld is not part of the sort of Unital Ring. It's because it's not a seed game. But that makes it quite interesting, because this is a book where we spend time in Unital Ring, but we also spend time in the Underworld. And it looks like going forward, we will be splitting our time between those 2 games and the real world. So, interesting kind of just setup for the arc overall. Argo also roughly organizes with Kirito. She will dive into Unital Ring to kind of meet up with them because she's effectively going to become part of that team. The way they phrase it in this is that, like, Kikuoka's like, oh, is Argo going to join your army? And Argo ultimately kind of agrees to this. So basically what happens from here is that we then go into Unital Ring. Kirito and Alice actually go off to the ruins to meet up with Argo where she wanted them to meet up. And Argo has set this meeting point for like a couple of reasons. One, there's a quest there that she wanted to kind of get some information on. Two, they know that there's going to be a meeting between a lot of other groups of players to try and figure out how to clear the game. And so they sort of want to spy on this to figure out what other players are feeling about the game. So this is where we get this sort of section of the book that is basically Kirito and Alice going on a little mission by themselves, while the rest of the crew stays back to guard the what was initially just the sort of campsite that they have, which is now basically formed into a whole city of itself, which for the first half of the book it's called Kirito Town because they can't really come up with a name. But by the end of the book, they realized that, okay, we should call it something. So they call it basically Rusna Rig, after like a Celtic castle. I think Osna comes up with that name. So, you know, it now actually has a name, and it is a proper town in that they have a bunch of like NPC species living there along with them. So it's really developing into something quite impressive. So that's all that stuff. The journey that they have is relatively nice. There's some interesting back and forth. Like if you want to know what the sort of Kirito Alice dynamic is like when they're not sort of doing the sort of shipping kind of stuff, this I think gets it across actually quite well here. It's just as comrades, they go through this. They need a canoe at one point, and they have to work together to sort of make that happen because they have kind of skills that match up for this. So they end up making one. They end up falling off a waterfall, which the waterfall comes up later on. So, you know, that's part of the reason it's included here. At this point, they also do have a scene where Kirito tells Alice about what Kikuoka told him, which is that, okay, someone has entered Underworld. And he basically organizes at this point that he's planning to bring Asuna and Alice in with him to investigate the Underworld later on. After that, we basically get to the meetup point. Argo isn't immediately there, but they do find this boss, which is basically a ghost called the Vengeful Wraith. They tried to fight it. It's obviously effectively immune to physical attacks. It does like 1-2% damage per hit. It's going to take a lot of work to get through this. Then suddenly someone screams out, the ghost is weak to fire. And so Kirito does a lot of the damage by basically putting a flammable material on his sword, lighting his sword on fire, and doing damage that way. But Argo is actually the one who finishes off the ghost by, it's sort of, as Kirito sort of slices it in half and it reforms, she just puts a torch in between it so it sort of burns itself to take off the rest of its health. So this is how Argo levels up from basically 1 to level 8, I think, in one go by sort of stealing the last attack here on this boss. But this is what immediately means she can be useful, obviously, along with these other characters. They do establish that I think Kirito, Alice, and Sinon are the highest leveled players in the game. Kirito and Sinon because they defeated pretty high level bosses. Alice because she doesn't go to school, so she can actually spend a lot of time in the game leveling up and grinding, so that's why she's on that level as well. So there's some nice details there. So yeah, this is where we get the idea. They're here to spy on a meeting of the other groups to clear the game. We get introduced to a lot of them, including, very notably, this one female kind of mage called Mutasina. So effectively what happens here is that some of the other characters, not her, are kind of organizing this. They're talking, this is what we want to do, when all of a sudden a giant magic circle basically engulfs the area. So there's like 100 players here, and obviously Kirito and Argo, because Alice stays behind because she doesn't want to be around so many people. She stays behind with Kuro the Panther. So they're not involved in this. It's just Kirito and Argo are on the outskirts of this, sort of hiding, watching this. And Mutasina does this crazy spell that effectively targets everyone within the magical circle with these sort of kind of clouds of magic, effectively. And if you get hit with them, you get this mark around your neck that she can then control you, effectively. The way it works is that when she puts her staff into the ground, everyone who has that mark, basically their throat closes up, and so they're on the verge of dying by like asphyxiation. So what happens here is that 2 of them come towards Kirito and Argo. Kirito is kind of like, okay, because this game is like a combination of other games, I can probably do my ALO thing where I do the sort of, cutting the spells with my swords, but I'm not high enough level, so I'm not super confident that I'll be able to do this on a great level. So he sort of goes with the idea that basically all I can really do is hope that I can destroy one of these things, which he does. He does manage to spell blast, as it's called, one of these spells, but he does get hit by the other one. So he ends up saving Argo, but gets hit himself. So he has the mark on him. And so when Mudasina uses the spell, Kirito gets hit also. This is where she takes over and is revealed to sort of be a villain here within the player base. But for kind of, I suppose, good reasons. She's just doing it in like the wrong way. She effectively takes control of like these whole groups of players. So she now has like 100 players on her side, along with the rest of her group. And she basically goes on this speech about how we could try to do the usual thing of have different groups work together and form alliances, but ultimately, I don't believe that will work. Players in these games are greedy. The nature of VMMORPG games is in darkness, and she cites examples like, look at SAO, it was a death game at the start, and people killed each other, and there wasn't many alliances. And look at what's happened since. There's been a lot of sort of controversy and issues, highlighting issues where like players won't work together, and so on. So she's trying to get around that because she wants to finish the game by forcibly uniting all of these players under the idea of, well, I effectively have complete control over all of you now. All I have to do is do the very simple thing of touch my staff to the ground, and suddenly you guys are on the verge of dying within a couple of seconds. So you either die because you only get one life in this game, or you actually join me to help. So this is a really interesting idea for a character of forcibly taking control of the player base to direct them to do something. Now, obviously the idea is that not a lot of the player base actually knows what's going on. None of them really have a great idea about how to figure this all out. Because again, there's that riddle at the start, the whole like area with the light and all this sort of stuff. There was the voice that spoke to them all. They don't know what exactly that is. They're all still trying to figure out what it means that sort of all the player bases are together in this game and everything. So that's that. So very interesting what she talks about. She seems to be against the idea of trust. She doesn't trust people. She doesn't believe people can trust each other. So that's an interesting concept to see what they do. Now, interestingly, Kirito and Argo do manage to get away. And obviously the idea is that this is such a devastating attack that she has that she isn't going to use it all the time. Otherwise, the usefulness of her group, they're just going to be killed in battle. So it's more the threat of this that is the case. So it doesn't happen all the time, but it could. But the key point here is that she doesn't know that she has got Kirito under the spell. That's an important thing to take away from this. She does explain that the time limit on this is limitless, basically. So that's quite interesting. So they go back to Alice. They all meet up. On the way back, Argo actually brings up the idea of oh wait, you found a waterfall and didn't do the really obvious thing, which is go into the obvious cave that's behind the waterfall. So they go in there, they find a lot of iron ore in there. It's kind of dangerous, but they get all the iron ore, and they figure out that they should probably seal this cave off, because what they find out from the end of the Mudasina scene is that her first plan of attack is to go after Kirito and his town. So in a day or two, she and all these players are coming with a big raid on the town. So they know that's coming, and they sort of figure out that, wait, on the way here, they'll likely probably discover this cave as well. that would mean we're facing like off against 100 people with iron armor, which is pretty high level for this point in the game. We can't let that happen. So Kirito takes resources out, and then they do some kind of clever building to kind of seal off the different points around the cave and, get out that way. So it's not like perfectly sealed off, but on an initial glance, I don't think the idea is that no one's going to immediately think that, oh, there's a secret cave in here, because it's quite well hidden with the building that was done. So that's that. They do discuss the idea that like Mudasina's spell was incredibly powerful. That the way obviously the different skills worked in the game is that she should have went back to like 100 out of 1,000, but a spell of that level is basically level 1,000 already. It's like it's maxed out. Better than that, what is it? There has to be some way to counter it. There's no way an ability that overpowered works as she has stated. So there's immediately the idea of like, okay, there's probably some way out of this, but how do they actually do that? And they, I think, while Kirito's doing that, the girls, I think, find the boss. It ends up being a giant slug. The entire battle happens off screen. They win, because the focus on the scene is to just quickly cover some stuff about the rewards from the boss fight. So Kirito gets a magic stone that has a rot magic inside. Argo from the fight against the ghost got a magic crystal that has ice magic inside. So initially they're like, okay, Kirito, you just take these. But Kirito's like, no, we should wait to give the ice magic to someone who is better with that, one of the magicians on the team. But Argo argues like, okay, you take the rot magic then, just because, not a lot of people are probably going to want that, and it's at least something that you can do that uses your magic. You don't have to become a magician, but you have an MP bar. This will at least allow you to use that. So Kirito eats the stone and gets a rot magic and uses the first attack of that to go up a level or two. Effectively, it just seems to fire slime, but the fact that it's rot, I'm guessing, means that there's probably some sort of like acidic nature to it that he isn't fully aware of yet. And I'm wondering, might this be some sort of a way where like him having rot magic rots away at this magic seal that he has on him, and that might be the way that he breaks free of that? But who knows? Either way, it was brought up here for a reason, and I assume it's going to be useful in its own way. As far as I'm aware, I don't think we cover who the ice magic was given to, or maybe I just quickly skipped over it. But there's still time for other stuff to happen. Then we get our sort of main sort of Kirito Asuna sort of romance scene in the book. So this is back in real life at school. It is Asuna's birthday. Kirito has bought her a present, and they go to eat lunch together in the sort of secret garden section that they have together. And they are celebrating Asuna's birthday. There's a few interesting things that happen here. It's obviously really fun. They want to share the food that they have together. So to cut it in half, Asuna hands Kirito this knife. And Kirito's like, wait, do you carry a knife around with you now? And the reveal effectively comes out that Asuna now has taken to carrying a knife around for self-defense, but it seems like actually more primarily so she can defend Kirito just in case something like the start of the Alicization arc happens and he is attacked. So they note that it's kind of illegal. Like if you're ever like, if the police ever came up to you, you'd be in trouble. But she just sort of argues that, the police never would come up to teenage girls. So it's cool. So it's just a nice scene to show that like she has made a change in the aftermath of that scene and feeling a little bit helpless, and she doesn't want that to happen again. So that's a nice little thing there. He then gives her the birthday present, which is that he has bought her a sugar maple seedling. And this is a very good present. She's very happy with this because this is what this is the wood that their favorite chair from their log cabin from Aincrad was made out of. They had this out on the deck, and so there's the idea that that's a really nice connection of like they have a connection to this sort of wood effectively, and they sort of come up with the idea of like, oh, what if we actually somehow manage to organize it so that we can plant the seedling here in this like secret garden area that we meet up in, and that would be really nice. So there's a little kiss scene. They don't like establish that it's anything huge, but just, you know, notable scene for the birthday, of course. And they do note that Kirito's birthday is going to be next week, so their birthdays are very close together. So we'll see if we get like a reverse scene in one of the upcoming volumes. This then transitions us into the Underworld stuff. So they go to the Roppongi office where they usually dive in, and it's Asuna, Alice, and Kirito. When they get there, they are told that, okay, there's a 2-hour limit. We're still sort of like testing the system again. We don't want anything crazy to happen like the last couple of times. So, you know, you basically only have 2 hours in here. So in there, they arrive in Lorelai's house, but they're not around. But they do meet her brother, Percy. It is Percy with a H. It's P-H-E-R-C-Y. So it's interesting. He recognizes Alice as, you know, a figure of legend, but doesn't recognize Kirito and Asuna. And this sort of becomes a little bit of a plot point in this section of the book. The idea of the information about how much the residents of the Underworld know about the Star King and Queen. We as the readers know it's Kirito and Asuna, but because of like weird like time things and so on, this is this weird dynamic where like there's an older version of Kirito who was the king in the Underworld up to this point. And it's kind of like, wait, what's going on? So it's very interesting that the kind of concepts that we get here. The main dynamic we actually get with Percy is that he reveals that the reason he's here and not in school is because he does go to school. He goes to the sword school that basically Kirito went to. But he basically doesn't go because he's not good at swords, or rather he has all the right, you know, qualities, but it just doesn't work for him. So they kind of go over this kind of scene where he tries to use a sword skill, and Kirito and everyone else notes that like actually like that's perfect form, like that would have been a sword skill for anyone else, but for some reason with him it just doesn't activate. Kirito even tests himself that like sword skills still work, right? And he actually gets it to work. So the only thing that they in any way hint at is that he's sort of told by other people that he's been abandoned by Terraria, which is obviously one of the gods of the Underworld. Now, obviously, technically we know that's just the account that Leafa logged in on. It is just like a high-level account, but I'm wondering, is there some sort of a thing like for some reason his power is connected to Terraria, and only if like Leafa logs in with that account does Percy actually have his powers or something like that? Because they note that she's sort of like the god of the sword in a way, so kind of interesting. So yeah, there's an interesting point here. The Star King and Queen, the name of them, have been sort of removed from the history records, or just were never recorded there in the first place. So they're always only ever referred to as Star King, Star Queen. So that's why most people don't immediately recognize Kirito and Asuna as being the Star King and Queen. They go outside. They're basically getting a tour of the place from Percy when some people from, you know, the police effectively come over. They have this thing called an incarnameter, which detects when people use incarnation. And Kirito did use incarnation in the scene with Percy to basically form a practice sword for him to use and so on. So Percy is about to potentially get into a bit of trouble over this. So Kirito basically walks out and is like, yeah, that was me, and tries to, you know, act cool and all. And he basically gets taken away. So he is taken away until Lorelai and Stika. I forget the exact pronunciation on these, but basically the descendants of Ronye and TS, they arrive and they basically pull rank on everyone because they're integrity pilots, the integrity knights of this era, and they basically say, okay, this is an integrity pilot situation now, we're in control, and they allow Kirito to go free because, of course, those two saw him display effectively the power of the Star King. So they know that it's Alice, Star King, and Star Queen that are here. So they fully believe that, and from the dialogue that we get, they just believe that it's the Star King who has lost his memories. We are then introduced to the Integrity Pilot Commander, who Kirito's just sitting next to this guy in a car, and he looks over and notes that, okay, it's this guy wearing a mask, but he notes the hair color, and what is it, like the kind of flaxen light hair, and immediately he's like, Eugeo? He's about to say Eugeo, of course, because effectively we get a page of this character, the character on the front of the book, who it is effectively Eugeo in a mask. It's either that or it's Char Aznavour from Gundam. So, it's definitely more leaning towards the Eugeo thing. And it's a big mystery. And obviously for Kirito, we know the death, the loss of Eugeo, the significance of that character to Kirito cannot be understated. So this is a huge thing for him, to potentially have a chance to meet him again. Right before they're logged out because the time is up, he does get the introduction from this guy who says that his name is Integrity Knight Commander Euline Herlentz. So the spelling on that is Eolyne, and then Herlentz as the second name. So again, it's a E kind of E awkward to pronounce name. You can see the sort of similarities to a certain degree there. See what they're going for, but fundamentally, wait, what? Eugeo is like dead, like full on dead. Like he turned into the sword. Like we saw the Fluchtlight, the whole thing, the soul pass on. So what's going on here? How is this like anything? How does this make sense? And I think they're playing on the idea that Kirito, in his past life, effectively, that he doesn't like remember, or like the memories are erased of being the Star King, but that actually happened, has done something here and found a way to like bring Eugeo back in some way, and we just don't know what the situation is. Because I think the reason they're bringing up Star King and Queen so much is that they are going to play on the idea of, I suppose mainly with Kirito, being confused about potentially the actions of his older self and wanting to know what's going on here, because he's very impressed by a lot of what he sees in the sort of future underworld here. And obviously the idea is that he, as Star King, facilitated a lot of these advancements in actually happening. So there's a cool dynamic there. Last scene of the volume. Back in Unital Ring, this is basically the day, I think they say, the day before the attack from all the players led by Mudasina is going to happen. Suddenly there's like an earthquake, something's coming their way, and they're kind of wondering what's going on. Has the attack come early? But they notice this giant monster, like quite a bit away, but out on the battlefield, and also that there's there's human-sized insect monsters around it, like attacking. And Egil suddenly perks up in the middle of all of this and is like, no, don't attack those insect monsters on the ground. And he rushes up and is like, Trish, is that you? And so it's actually revealed that one of these insects is Egil's wife playing the game Insect Sight. And that all the others are people from that game. So this is the time when you really see that, okay, it's not just ALO and GGO here, it is all these other games. I think this insect game was mentioned during the Rosario arc, I think, as one of the games that they had played beforehand, I think. So interesting that this is brought up again here. But like it's kind of almost random and you kind of forget these type of things. But yeah, there's just players from this insect game here as well. So there's a cool reunion here, as obviously Egil is speaking English to these players, because I think they reveal that's an American game primarily. And so he's kind of communicating back and forth between them. They're going to work together to fight this giant monster who Kirito initially refers to as a demon. But they're all like, wait, something about this boss feels very, very similar to something we've seen before. What is it? And it's only after they block the first attack and realize, like, oh no, like Kirito's health goes from 100 to 40 in one hit, and they realize they're up against it here. They realize that this monster is very similar to the boss from Aincrad from floor 75, the Skull Reaper. It's the Skull Reaper not as a skeleton. So it's the Skull Reaper with flesh, and it's called the Life Harvester. So very cool reference here of like the kind of complete version of the floor 75 boss. And yeah, so it looks like next volume we're going to have to at least start off with a giant boss battle against this thing. Multiple player bases going up against it. And then I do wonder, like, are they going to have to go straight from that into defending from all the other players? Or might this boss battle take so long that it actually prevents the attack from the other player base from happening? There's a few things kind of all building up on top of each other at the same time. So, you know, it's quite interesting overall. Really cool reference there at the end, because, of course, the Skull Reaper, remember that the intensity of that boss battle, like lots of high level players who have got to floor 75 immediately killed, like devastatingly how powerful it was. And if this is an even more complete version and they're not even high leveled, like this doesn't look good. So wonder what's going to happen here. So yeah, that is the volume. When you summarize it like that, like a lot does happen. There are definitely a few points at which I think the pacing is a little slow. Like I think some of the Kirito Alice stuff at the start feels like it maybe takes up a little bit too much page count. But other than that, there's some interesting stuff being set up here. The Mudasina reveal of just how powerful she is, the way she takes over the most of the player base, is actually very, very intriguing to see how that plays out, especially because Kirito now has this mark and is vulnerable to her, but at least initially she is not going to know he's vulnerable because he can just cover his neck and not know, because all of her allies are going to have that mark. So if she wants to stop Kirito, she has to stop like basically all of her own troops effectively. So there is a little bit of like play with this. It's not just that she has complete control over Kirito. She's losing on a broader scale if she does that. So it's interesting. She still ultimately, I would say, has the advantage because of this. But we can play with it because they have more information than kind of she does right now. Now, my immediate speculation is that is Mudasina the name of the in-game name for Shikimi Kimura? That would roughly, I think, make some sort of a sense in that she's planning to do something big. Now, admittedly, I don't think we got too much from the characterization of Shikimi Kimura, because if you remember in the last volume, that scene, I think, was more of like Asuna. We didn't get to see how it played out. It was just Asuna reflecting on meeting this character rather than us actually seeing it happen. So this feels like, you know, okay, who is this person in real life? Is it just a temporary villain for a little bit, or is it something big? Because the other character it potentially could be is Shikimi Kimura the one who dived into the Underworld? And then potentially, are they one and the same? Because if Kirito can go into the Underworld and also Unital Ring, that means someone else can as well. And if she's part of a company that is related to these games, she has that ability to do it too. So it is notable just that that character has sort of been forgotten a little bit in everything. Yet, here's this new female villain introduced. Who could it be? So that's quite interesting. I like that we got Argo for quite a bit of this book. She's properly come into play and is sort of invested in what's going on, has a little bit of investigation stuff to do herself. Really like the little Kirito Asuna scene in the middle of the book. That was quite nice. And then the Underworld stuff is just very, very interesting, because obviously Moon Cradle was kind of disappointing that it was only 2 volumes. I would have liked more of that. And then we only got little bits of, you know, stuff related to Underworld from the very end of Alicization. So coming back to it here and addressing, I suppose, the legacy of what happened during the time acceleration phase is, I think it makes for a very intriguing plot, especially now with this Eugeo copy character here. Kirito is now invested heavily in what's going on here. Alice already is, because of course Selka's here, still in deep freeze, I assume, but that's why Alice is invested on this side of things now. Kirito is with the potential Eugeo stuff, and I do wonder how intense he's going to be about this, because this is going to be a massive drive for him if he at all believes that like the spirit of Eugeo lives on in some way. And then yeah, really cool massive boss battle reference. There's probably very few bosses you could have brought back up that would have the same impact as the Skull Reaper, but altered in this way. So yeah, they're my thoughts on SAO Volume 24. Like I said, it came out today. In the comments, if you have any questions about the volume or your thoughts, if you've read it yourself, let me know below. But other than that, that has been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.